The private lounge of the Belmont estate buzzed with laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses punctuating the air. Dim chandeliers cast a golden glow over plush velvet seating, where a group of young men lounged, exuding effortless arrogance. Among them sat Lucas Belmont, heir to the Belmont real estate empire, a man who carried his wealth as if it were a birthright rather than an inheritance. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips as he swirled the whiskey in his glass. "You can always tell who belongs and who doesn't," Lucas mused, his voice dripping with amusement. "It's in the way they carry themselves, the way they hesitate before taking a seat, like they're waiting for permission." His best friend, Derek Langford, let out a chuckle, adjusting the gold cufflinks on his tailored jacket. "Exactly. That's why the charity gala is the perfect event. It's not really about giving back, it's about reminding people where they stand." The others laughed in agreement, nodding along as the conversation shifted to the upcoming gala, an exclusive event attended by politicians, CEOs, and old money elites. It was a spectacle of wealth and power, where connections mattered more than the so-called charity they pretended to support. "Who are you bringing, Lucas?" another friend, Mason, asked, arching an eyebrow. "That model from Milan? Or the actress from last month?" Lucas smirked, setting down his glass. "Neither. Too predictable." He leaned forward, his tone laced with mischief. "Actually, I think I'll bring my maid." A beat of silence. Then, the table erupted in laughter. Wait, you're serious?" Derek gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. "You're going to show up with your maid?" "Oh, this is rich." "Why not?" Lucas shrugged, playing up the absurdity of the idea. "Can you imagine? The gasps, the whispers? It would be legendary." "Please," Mason scoffed, shaking his head. "No way you actually go through with that. You'd ruin your reputation." Derek leaned in, eyes glinting with amusement. 50 grand says you won't." Lucas tilted his head, considering it for a moment. Then, he grinned. "Done." From the corner of the room, near the bar where she had been serving drinks, Elena Vasquez stood still, her hands tightening slightly around the tray she carried. She had learned to tune out most of the things Lucas and his friends said, but this she heard clearly. Her fingers curled involuntarily, but her face remained impassive, her posture poised as if the words hadn't stung. She had worked for the Belmonts for 2 years, keeping her head down, doing what was asked of her without complaint. She knew what she was to them, a shadow, a background figure, someone meant to be invisible. Yet now, she was the subject of their entertainment, a joke. She exhaled quietly, schooling her expression before stepping forward and placing Lucas' refreshed drink on the table with practiced grace. He barely glanced at her, too caught up in the thrill of his own ridiculous scheme. As she turned to leave, Derek called after her, still grinning. "Hey, Elena, better start practicing how to curtsy. You're going to be royalty for a night." More laughter. Elena said nothing. She simply walked away, her back straight, her head held high. But deep down, something inside her shifted. Elena Vasquez had learned long ago that dreams were fragile things. They could shine brilliantly, filling a person with warmth and hope, but they could also be shattered in an instant, leaving behind only the cold weight of reality. She had been a child of music once, raised in a cramped apartment above a convenience store. Her world had been small but full of song. Her mother would hum lullabies as she cooked, her father would whistle while fixing old furniture, and Elena would sing. Her voice had been a gift, one that had turned heads even in the crowded streets of their neighborhood. When she sang, the world quieted. Teachers noticed. A local music instructor had offered to train her for free, recognizing the rare talent in her voice. At 15, she had earned a scholarship to a prestigious music academy, a place where she felt, for the first time, that she truly belonged. Then the accident happened. A rainy night, a truck that lost control. 2 lives gone in an instant. The scholarship couldn't feed her little brother, Miguel. It couldn't pay rent. It couldn't keep the electricity on in their tiny home. So at 16, Elena left school. At 18, she became a maid. She never sang again. Now, at 22, she had learned to move through life without making ripples. She woke early, worked late, and sent nearly every penny home to Miguel, who had been left with permanent injuries from the accident. He couldn't walk without braces, and the medical bills never stopped. Still, she never complained. She never asked for anything. She simply endured. So when Lucas Belmont handed her an ornate invitation to the Belmont Foundation Gala, Elena could only stare at it in confusion. "What is this?" she asked cautiously. Lucas smirked, leaning lazily against the marble countertop in the Grand Belmont Estate's kitchen. Exactly what it looks like. You're coming to the gala with me. Elena frowned, her grip on the invitation tightening. Why? Does it matter? Lucas shrugged. It's an order. Be ready. He turned to leave, but Elena spoke again, her voice calm but firm. I don't belong there. Lucas paused, turning back to her. That's the point, he said smoothly. You'll be entertainment. Elena felt something sharp twist in her chest, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she lowered her eyes and nodded. Yes, sir. Lucas smirked, satisfied, and walked away. Lucas Belmont had never known struggle. He had never worried about money, never had to wonder where his next meal would come from, never feared eviction, or medical bills, or the crushing weight of responsibility. His father, Richard Belmont, had built an empire from nothing, a real estate dynasty that spanned luxury hotels, skyscrapers, and private resorts. Lucas had grown up in penthouses and private schools, surrounded by people who either worshipped or envied him. His father had expected him to take over the business one day, but Lucas had never cared about work. Why should he? Everything was already his. He had no patience for lessons on hard work, no interest in learning how to earn something. To him, money was a weapon, a shield, a game. And this ridiculous bet with Derek was just another way to amuse himself. He didn't think much about Elena after that conversation in the kitchen. He sent a message to his assistant, arranging for a stylist, a designer, and a personal shopper to fix her. The idea of his maid being transformed into a socialite for a night was absurd, but the thought of Derek's face when he actually followed through with the dare made it all worth it. Throughout the day, his phone buzzed with messages from his friends. Derek, bro, you're actually doing this. Mason, this is going to be legendary. Derek, hope she doesn't try to steal the silverware. Lucas laughed to himself, typing back casual, smug responses. He wasn't worried. This was a joke, a fleeting amusement. That was all. Elena stood in front of the full-length mirror in the boutique, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The dress was unlike anything she had ever worn, deep sapphire, with a fitted bodice that hugged her slender frame before cascading into soft waves of silk. The fabric shimmered under the warm light, delicate and weightless, as if it belonged to someone from another world. Her hair, once always tied back in a practical ponytail, now fell in soft waves, framing her face. Her skin glowed with subtle makeup, her lips painted a shade of red that felt almost too bold. For a moment, she didn't feel like a maid. For a moment, she was just a girl in a beautiful dress. The stylist, a polished woman in her 40s, stepped back, admiring her work. You clean up well, she said approvingly. Elena swallowed, her throat tight. She didn't know how to respond. She turned slightly, looking at herself from different angles. It had been years since she had worn something beautiful. Years since she had even looked at herself this way. A memory surfaced, standing in front of a mirror at 16, wearing a simple recital gown, nervous but excited for her first solo performance. Back then, her world had been full of music, of possibilities. That girl had dreams. This girl had nothing but a borrowed dress and a cruel joke hanging over her head. Elena exhaled slowly, pushing the memory away. This wasn't a fairy tale. She knew exactly why she had been brought here. She turned away from the mirror, her expression unreadable. I'm ready, she said quietly. The Belmont Foundation Gala was an event of spectacle and status, where the rich paraded their wealth under the guise of philanthropy. The grand ballroom of the Astoria Hotel gleamed under golden chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and aged wine. Women in designer gowns clutched champagne flutes, their laughter crisp and practiced. Men in tailored suits exchanged firm handshakes, each conversation laced with subtle power plays. Into this world, Elena Vasquez stepped, an outsider draped in borrowed elegance. Her hands clenched at her sides as she walked beside Lucas, her heart pounding against her ribs. The moment they entered, conversations faltered. Eyes flickered toward her, scanning, assessing, judging. The whispers followed immediately after, hushed but sharp enough to cut. Who is she? Lucas Belmont brought a maid. She must be some charity case. How amusing. Elena kept her face composed, though every part of her wanted to shrink under their scrutiny. Lucas, on the other hand, looked entirely at ease, his usual smug confidence unwavering. He led her forward, a glass of whiskey in one hand, the other placed lightly on her back as if to guide her, but she knew better. This wasn't a protective gesture. This was ownership, a display. Relax, Lucas murmured close to her ear, his tone dripping with amusement. You're making history tonight. Elena said nothing, her nails digging into her palm. As they descended the grand staircase into the main ballroom, a familiar voice called out. Well, well, look what the wind blew in. Derek Langford stood near the bar, smirking as he took a slow sip of his drink. He looked Elena up and down, his gaze lingering just long enough to be insulting. Lucas, you actually did it. Lucas grinned, clinking his glass against Derek's. Told you I don't back down from a challenge. Mason, another of their wealthy circle, let out a low chuckle. Damn, I almost feel bad. She looks like she actually believes she belongs here. Elena's stomach twisted, but she didn't let it show. Come now, boys, came a velvety voice from behind them. Madame Evelyn Winslow, the event's host and an influential socialite, stepped into their circle. She was a woman of power and poise, dressed in a gown worth more than a working-class salary. She barely spared Elena a glance before addressing Lucas. A bold choice, dear, she said smoothly, her painted lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. But I suppose every gala needs its entertainment. Laughter rippled through the group. Lucas smirked, lifting his glass in mock acknowledgement. Elena kept her expression neutral, though the weight of humiliation pressed heavy on her. Then Derek, emboldened by the moment, leaned in slightly and quipped, Tell me, Elena, do you prefer serving the appetizers or clearing the tables? Since you'll be doing neither tonight, I imagine it must feel strange. Another round of laughter. Elena inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She turned to Derek, meeting his gaze directly. And then, instead of showing an ounce of shame, she smiled. Not a forced, awkward smile. A real, serene one. Actually, she said, her voice clear, I find that people's true character is revealed in how they treat those who serve them. The amusement in Derek's face flickered. Madame Winslow raised an eyebrow. The surrounding guests exchanged glances. Lucas, who had been expecting her to cower, suddenly found himself intrigued. Before anyone could respond, the evening's host took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer declared, as part of tonight's charity initiative, we have a special opportunity for entertainment. A performance slot has been reserved for any willing guest who would like to contribute their talents in the name of philanthropy. A murmur spread through the room. This was unexpected. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, I nominate Lucas Guest. A cruel chuckle followed. Others quickly joined in, the suggestion taking root. What a wonderful idea, Madame Winslow said, her eyes gleaming with amusement. Elena, darling, do tell us, what is your talent? Elena's pulse roared in her ears. She glanced at Lucas, expecting him to stop this, to tell them they had taken it too far. Instead, he leaned in, lips close to her ear, and whispered, might as well give them a show. A choice. Elena could refuse, could shrink away and let them win. Or she could rise. Her breath was unsteady, but she lifted her chin, her voice quiet yet firm. I'll sing. A hush fell over the room. The laughter faded. A stagehand quickly arranged a microphone. The orchestra waited. Elena stepped forward, her heart hammering. The stage lights blinded her momentarily, but she steadied herself, inhaling deeply. And then she sang. The room held its breath. The ballroom was deathly silent as Elena stepped onto the stage. The weight of 100 eyes pressed down on her, expectant, amused, waiting for the inevitable humiliation. She could feel it, the sneers barely hidden behind champagne flutes, the hushed whispers of mockery. And yet, as she stood there, hands trembling slightly at her sides, she felt something deeper. The memory of another stage, another time. She had been 16, standing before a grand piano in a modest recital hall, her heart pounding not with fear but with excitement. Her parents had been in the front row, their smiles warm, their pride unmistakable. Sing from here, mi amor, her mother had said, pressing a gentle hand to Elena's chest. From the heart. That is where music lives. Elena closed her eyes. And then she sang. The first note hung in the air like a single drop of rain before a storm. Then came the next, and the next. Her voice, rich and operatic, soared through the vast ballroom, filling every corner with haunting beauty. The laughter died instantly. The amusement drained from their faces, replaced by something far more vulnerable, shock. It was a voice that didn't belong to a maid. It belonged to a star. Her soprano notes were pure and powerful, carrying a depth of emotion so raw that it clawed at the hearts of every listener. Each note was laced with sorrow, with longing, with a lifetime of dreams left unfulfilled. She sang not just for them, but for the girl she once had been, for the girl who had believed she could have it all before the world had stolen it away. The room blurred. Flash, her mother, swaying to music in the kitchen, laughing as Elena twirled beside her. Flash, her father, his calloused hands clapping as he watched her practice, beaming with pride. Flash, her younger self, standing in front of a mirror in a music academy, believing she had a future. And now, this moment. As her voice crescendoed into the final, heart-wrenching note, silence followed. No one moved. Then, a sound. A single, sharp inhale from somewhere in the crowd, followed by a quiet sniffle. Elena opened her eyes, breathless. Tears glistened in the eyes of the guests who had moments ago been laughing at her. Even Madame Winslow, who had once looked at her with nothing but amusement, now stared at her with something else entirely, respect. But the most striking reaction of all came from Richard Belmont. Luca's father, a man known for his unshakable composure, sat motionless, his hand resting lightly against his lips. His eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had built an empire, were glossy with emotion. Lucas, standing beside him, was utterly frozen. His usual arrogance had evaporated, replaced by something unrecognizable. For the first time in his life, Lucas Belmont was speechless. The moment stretched, heavy and unbreakable. Then, applause. It started with a single clap from the back of the room, hesitant at first. Then another, and another, until the entire ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. Elena stood there, stunned, as people who had looked down on her only minutes ago now applauded her as if she were royalty. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Madame Winslow stepped forward, smoothing down her gown as she addressed the room. "Well," she said, voice steady but touched with emotion. "That was unexpected and utterly magnificent." She turned to Elena, her expression unreadable for a moment before softening. "My dear," she continued, "talent such as yours should never go unnoticed, and it certainly should not be wasted." She glanced toward Richard Belmont, who nodded in agreement. "Therefore," Madame Winslow announced, "I would like to personally offer you a full scholarship to the Winslow Conservatory of Music. And," she added, glancing at Richard, "it seems Mr. Belmont is willing to sponsor your training beyond that, should you accept." Elena's breath caught. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. A scholarship? A chance to train professionally? Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, trying to ground herself in reality. This wasn't a dream. This was real. She turned slightly, her gaze locking onto Lucas. His expression was unreadable, shame, awe, something else flickering behind his eyes. She should have felt triumphant, but she didn't. She only felt free. Slowly, with trembling hands, she nodded. "I accept." And for the first time in years, Elena Vasquez allowed herself to believe in a future beyond survival. Lucas sat in stunned silence as the thunderous applause still echoed in his ears. The world around him blurred, the glittering chandeliers, the lavish ballroom, the murmurs of awe. Everything felt distant, unimportant, except for one thing: Elena. She stood center stage, poised yet trembling, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Not of sadness, but of something far deeper: liberation. Lucas had brought her here as a joke. He had expected humiliation, laughter at her expense. Instead, she had commanded the entire room, left them breathless, and walked away with an opportunity that most could only dream of. And he had never felt so small. The weight of his own cruelty settled over him like a crushing force. He had paraded her in front of these people like a spectacle, treating her like she was nothing. But now they all knew the truth. She wasn't nothing. She was extraordinary. Lucas barely registered the guests swarming around her, their previous scorn replaced with admiration. He could only stare as his father, Richard Belmont, rose from his seat and approached Elena. Lucas tensed. His father had always been a man of few words, a figure of power and judgment. His approval was rare, reserved for those who truly earned it. And now, he was offering it to her. "You have a remarkable gift," Richard said, his voice firm but warm. "It would be a shame for it to go unfulfilled." Elena met his gaze, still wary, still guarded, but she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Belmont." Lucas exhaled slowly. His father had never looked at him that way. Not once. Suddenly, the whispers around the room shifted into something else entirely. The media was already buzzing. Reporters typed furiously on their phones, socialites murmured about the spectacle they had just witnessed. By the next morning, the headlines would tell the story in their own words. The night an angel sang amongst the wolves. From maid to star, Elena Vasquez stuns the elite. Lucas Belmont's Gala stunt backfires as underdog shines. Lucas clenched his jaw as the reality sank in. This wasn't just a story. This was her story, and he had been cast as the villain. Lucas couldn't get the performance out of his head. He had spent the night replaying it, over and over, until the shame became unbearable. He had to make this right. That afternoon he found Elena in the Belmont Estate's garden, sitting on a bench, her posture relaxed but her expression unreadable. She had changed out of the stunning gown, back into the simple clothes of her reality. Yet somehow, she still carried the same grace. Lucas hesitated before stepping closer. "Elena," he started, his voice quieter than usual. She glanced at him, waiting. Lucas exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I know I was an ass, no, worse than that. I treated you like you weren't even a person, and I'm sorry." Elena studied him for a long moment, then let out a quiet breath. "Are you?" Lucas blinked. "What? Are you sorry for what you did?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Or just sorry that everyone saw it?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to say that he truly regretted everything, that he had realized the depth of his mistakes, but the truth was, he wasn't sure. For so long his world had revolved around status, power, and amusement at others' expense. Now, for the first time, he was questioning all of it. But she didn't owe him forgiveness, and she wasn't going to give it just because he asked. She stood, meeting his gaze directly. "You don't get to say sorry and erase what happened," she said. "I don't need your guilt, Lucas. I got what I needed from last night." Lucas swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand." She tilted her head slightly, studying him, as if waiting to see if he truly meant it. Then, with a small, almost sad smile, she turned and walked away. Lucas remained there, rooted to the ground, watching as she disappeared down the garden path. And for the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of who he had been. Empty. Shallow. A man who had never done a single meaningful thing. And now, he didn't know if he could ever change. But for the first time, he wanted to try. The Grand Opera House was bathed in golden light, the air thick with anticipation. The audience, dressed in their finest, murmured in hushed excitement as they waited for the night's star performer. Backstage, Elena Vasquez stood before a mirror, adjusting the shimmering gown that now felt like a second skin. It had been months since that fateful night at the Belmont Gala, months of rigorous training, sleepless nights, and relentless dedication. Now, she was here. She stepped onto the stage, her heart steady, her purpose clear. As the first notes of the orchestra swelled, she closed her eyes and sang. The sound was no longer hesitant, no longer burdened by doubt. It soared, filling every corner of the hall with breathtaking emotion. And somewhere, in the very last row of the darkened theater, Lucas Belmont sat in silence. He had no VIP seat, no entourage, no desire to be seen. For once, this wasn't about him. He had come simply to listen. As Elena reached the final note, the audience erupted into thunderous applause, rising to their feet. For a brief moment, as the curtain began to fall, Elena lifted her gaze toward the back of the room. She saw him. She didn't smile, didn't wave. But for a fleeting second, her eyes met his, and in them, Lucas saw everything. Not resentment, not pity, just acknowledgement. And then she turned away, stepping into the light of her future. The curtain fell. As the curtain falls on Elena's journey, we are reminded of a powerful truth. Greatness isn't defined by where we come from, but by the strength of our spirit. She was never just a maid, never just a joke. She was always meant for more. And in the end, she didn't need revenge or validation. She simply rose above. And as for Lucas, maybe, just maybe, that night didn't just change her life. Maybe it changed his too. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where we bring you powerful tales of resilience, redemption, and the human spirit. Until next time, keep believing in the power of transformation.